Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lit Chat, the premier podcast by the OCU chapter of the English Honor Society Sigma Tau Delta. Today, my name is Luke Barrett.
And my name is Cate Kurtz.
And we will be discussing Arthurian legend and lore. So, you mentioned that you wanted to start off by going through some of the chronology of this. And I think you're going to have a deeper so I have one note about the actual Arthur person, and then one note about a Frenchman. So everything in between that, I don't have written down. So what I know about King Arthur, the person, as opposed to the literary figure, is that he was a king in Britain, or England,
he's a
Britain.
British leader.
Yes,
yeah.
Britain historically in the 5th and 6th centuries, classical era.
Yes.
And he defeated the Saxons, which were an invading group of people from pretty much all across Europe. Was my understanding
They
of
were
it.
Germanic people.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's kind of interesting to note. So yeah, he's like a famous figure for defending against them, which is really important because out of all of the kind of modern iterations we're going to talk about, I think it's like the 2009 King Arthur film that has Keira Knightley in it is like the only one that actually has Saxons involved.
Oh, okay.
Where King Arthur's name is Artorius because he's part Roman in that iteration.
Oh, interesting.
I know.
Weird.
Like some of them place him as being Roman because at the time in Britain, Rome was also occupying portions of Britain.
Whoa.
So the idea was that King Arthur was a figure who was half Roman, half British.
Okay.
And he was sent to be the commander of the Camelot fort, which was a Roman held fort where they went to the different tribes in Britain and took up conscripts from all of them and forced them to be infantrymen and guards within the fort.
Wow. Okay.
If that makes sense at all. But that's kind of what one of the older legends, which is more the historical, I guess, side that's out of the like romance. Okay. And that one's where they have 15 years of service. And they have to get over the 15 years, and then once they do, they're released.
Oh, okay, cool.
But they all die at the end of the movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's pretty
bad.
bad.
That's unfortunate.
So, but Keira Knightley does a great job as Guinevere, who in that version is a Saxon, which is kind of interesting.
Interesting.
So the history of King Arthur. So though he was kind of a British figure, the most famous work about him is actually French.
Yes.
Which is really interesting, because I did not know that till I was kind of looking it up again.
Yeah.
Because, like, just a little background. I was a massive King Arthur nerd growing up. We had a King Arthur section in my library, and I read all 38 books.
Why am I not surprised, but also amazed?
It was so good.
Okay.
So great. And they're fun books. So there are a bunch of iterations. They all a lot of them are really interesting. So they follow the different poetic movements if you kind of lay them out.
Oh.
And you can see how they change based on what the big movement of the time is. Like whenever you get, for example, and the same with the Odyssey, but for example, when you get to minimalism in poetry, there were a couple of like King Arthur iterations coming out that took a minimalist approach to how they were written.
Interesting.
So it's kind of interesting because he's known as the king of the people, and his literature reflects the people's literature and poetry.
That's cool. I watched, before this, I watched a really great, 6-minute TED Ed video. And it explained that, so a lot of, Arthurian lore first came out in, Celtic poetry.
Yes.
And the first textual reference to Arthur the person does not refer to King Arthur. It refers to some other guy, and it says he was a great warrior, but he was no Arthur.
Yes.
So Arthur is already this great figurehead, and then in the, I want to say 12th century, George of Monmouth, who is an English cleric, says, I'm going to start patching together all of these histories, all of these myths, all of this Celtic lore, and all of English tradition to kind of create this semblance of a King Arthur history.
Yeah, and it's isn't that within Geoffrey's or Joffrey's histories from 1100? is where like that appears in.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, and it also was, it had some Welsh ties as well.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Interesting. I mean, I guess that makes sense because especially during the time, Wales would have been like contested territory of Britain, and they would have been running all around that area too. So
exactly. The other interesting thing about like the histories, so like I don't know how you said it, but like Jeffrey or whatever, it's the same guy. It's just that the name of it was the histories. Is it also points out all of like King Arthur's round table, but I don't think that's where the round table starts. I think that idea is actually picked up in the French version.
Yes.
But the characters start with this, like Uther Pendragon, because like Arthur's full name is Arthur Pendragon. And then like Excalibur's from that time, as well as things like that, which is very interesting. And a cool part is if you go to those parts of England, they have King Arthur tours where they feel like they figured out where the Battle of Avalon took place. Okay. And you can go and they're like, this is where we think the sword was pulled from the stone. This is where we think the battle happened. This is where Mordred betrayed Arthur and stabbed him.
So, is there a historical, because you have mentioned this idea that there is a historical event where there is a sword inside of a rock, and a man named Arthur goes up to it and picks it up, actually in the real world, and is then king. Yeah, so funny you say that. There is some historical evidence that says Arthur existed. There's nothing that says I believe that part. Now, I know you were talking about the sword and the stone. Could that be fabricated? Absolutely. But is it fun knowing that there's a tour in England where you can go and be like, this is the sword and the stone, my guy? Like... that's... Nothing says it didn't happen. Yeah. Is all I'm saying. Because it could have been... Let's think about it this way. It could have been that they had carved out a rock. Or, like, there was two rocks put together and they just set their sword down. And then maybe he was like, oh my god. Or who knows? Maybe he lied. Maybe he was like, look what I did, everyone. I can defy nature and all concepts of how strong I am and pull a sword from the stone. Wow. Which is also kind of a fun allegory if you think about it, because Arthur, as this great king who he's supposed to, kind of unify Britain or bring Britain back from Saxon Roman control, if you think about it in the idea of like the rock being, I would say like almost like pre-industrial or pre-modern Britain as being something where you can use, you're giving me a really skeptical look, but let me finish, is because it's an untapped raw material, but from it you're pulling out a sword which had to have... Yeah, what are you thinking? You've gone on, finish your metaphor, please. I need to hear the end of this. Because if you think about it, like, steel and what you melt down to become a sword, which is an entirely man-made entity, like, having those together, it almost is like pulling it out of the stone, in my opinion, could almost be an allegory for that transition to, like, either... united or like a new version of England as being like an empire. That makes sense. I thought you said pre-industrial, so I thought you were going to say it was a metaphor for the Industrial Revolution. And I was going to be like, Kate, that's not time period. You're a history major. Could you imagine if I said that, though? That would have been hilarious. That's where I thought you were going for a second. No, I meant more of like, you kind of get what I was saying. Yes, though. I do. It makes sense. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So we have this idea of a pseudo-historical King Arthur. Yes. But the first person to really popularize Arthur in story is, and I'm gonna do my best, is Création de Troyes. Yeah. Who's a Frenchman and a cleric, and he finds George or Geoffrey of Monmouth. Is it George or Geoffrey? I think it's Geoffrey. Okay, if I've said George, I apologize. Geoffrey of Monmouth's work. They're both G names. It's okay. And basically starts writing them as like romances and more fantastical things, and that I believe is where the introduction of the Round Table occurs, and also the introduction of Lancelot as a character, and the story of the Holy Grail, which it was interesting because the video I watched pointed out that, like, the original idea for the Holy Grail might have been taken from Celtic lore actually, because it's like this magical artifact.
Yeah.
But then because he was doing it at the time of the Crusades, that's when everybody kind of like layered on top of it all of the Christian symbology and ideology, and that's why it became like such a Christian thing.
Yeah.
As opposed to like a mystical thing. And so that is where we get like the original, or at least like the first majorly like historical Arthurian stories, which is cool.
Yeah, which is really cool because that one also isn't referred to as like the histories. Because like Geoffrey, for example, if that's how you say his name, it might be like it's Joffrey, who knows? It's like he really, because there are people who really think King Arthur was a historical figure who wasn't named Arthur, who was named something else.
Okay.
And all of these stories perhaps are not all about one person, but more so are about differing or varying bands of crusaders like Arthur's story. And they kind of all came together to create one history that somebody was writing. And to make it more concrete, gave them all the name Arthur.
Oh.
Is like one theory. I watched a documentary about that like 10 years ago, and that was like this crack theory that this historian had, where he was looking at the translations and then also some historical documents and like stuff talking about differing wars from that time and how it could have been some people, it could have been somebody named Arthur. All everyone knows is it was a really good ruler who could have been named Arthur.
Okay.
But we don't know.
I like this multiplicity idea,
It's
like
so cool.
this Into the Spiderverse version of King Arthur, where it's like,
I'm
King Arthur. No, I'm Arthur.
Exactly, we're all King Arthur. But you know.
Let me start from the beginning. I'm Arthur. I was bitten by a radioactive king, and now.
And I pulled the sword from the stone.
Yep.
Oh man.
But I think, so at least for me, my first, you said you read a ton of Arthurian stuff.
Yeah.
So I would love if you could give me a rundown on that. Actually, I'm just going to start there. Please go off.
I will. So I read the original, like, The Death of Arthur, like that French book. I own the book. I have the Gilded Edition from Barnes & Noble. I read it constantly as a kid. I have the narrative version of it, also from Barnes & Noble. I was obsessed with The Sword and the Stone. This is what propelled me to love Renaissance fairs. This is where it all started.
You know, that's fair.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
And I also, there's this really lovely grouping of books, and they're just called Morgan Le Fay and then Mordred. And that's about the two main enemies from the stories, which are Morgana, which in some iterations is Arthur's sister or half-sister, just a ward of Uther Pendragon. And then you have Mordred, who in some iterations, like the Merlin TV show, is a druid boy who's taken in by Arthur because there's, magic is outlawed and Uther wants to kill the boy and Arthur takes him in and hides him.
Mordred the Druid Boy is my new band name.
Can it be? But no, in those two books actually humanize the two villains. Like the whole purpose is just talking about their side of things, which is really interesting because if you think about it, those are the two villains kind of represent, at least in the lore of Arthur, like Arthurian mythology and legend or whatever, is you have, they villainize a female character, which is Morgana, and they villainize a young druid boy, which in that instance almost is supposed to represent minorities because the druids were minorities and that kind of lore. And it humanizes them and kind of makes you hate Arthur a little bit.
Nice.
It's great because they're also written in first person, so they're highly personal. And it starts with them as children and what leads both characters in their separate books to pretty much their psychological breaks that make them eventually just try to kill Arthur. and it's all about that, and then at the end of it you walk away and you're like, yeah, let's kill Arthur, he's a jerk.
Yeah.
So that's what those are. Some of the other ones, like a really good one is, I think it's called A Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain.
Yes.
It's one of the first instances of satire that was ever created, and I have not one but 2 copies on my bookshelf.
Good.
I have not read it, but I'm obsessed with the idea of it because my understanding of it is as this critique of, I mean, at least of the time period, Mark Twain's contemporary American society, but by using those like old chivalric ideals and the Arthurian like cycle to kind of examine what was happening in America at the time and basically call everyone a bunch of idiots.
Pretty much.
So
yeah, no, I agree. I love that book just for the idea that he gets there and he's like, oh, for my farmer's almanac that I memorized, there's an eclipse that happens the day I got sent back in time. And he's like, you can't hurt me, I took away the sun. And they were like, oh my god. And Merlin's like, oh my god. And then he's like, but don't worry, if you release me, I'll bring the sun back. And then he...
Whoa!
And then he does, because then the eclipse is over.
Nice.
But it's just such a funny idea that this kid memorized an almanac of, like, every eclipse.
Well, what else would you read during the time, though? I mean, I guess...
I'd read the almanac, apparently.
If I was a farmer's kid, I'd be reading that shit day in and day out.
Pretty much.
So my primary, and I think a lot of people's primary exposure to Arthurian legend is likely gonna be Sir Gawain in the Green Knight, or Sir Gawain in the Green Knight, depending on how you want to take it. And I mean, I don't talk to people, but you know, it's taught in high school, middle school. For me, it was high school. And it's a story about one of Arthur's knights who has this journey of self-discovery, and it's very good for examining like the archetypal hero's journey and all of that stuff. There's a lot of color archetypes that come up in there. And I mean, more than that, it's really, I guess the quick summary, if I may.
Oh yeah, please. I haven't read it, so.
Oh, you haven't read it?
Of all the King Arthur stuff.
Oh, really?
You haven't read that?
Okay, all right. So Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is about this New Year's party. It's a New Year's party. Yeah, it's a New Year's party.
Can I interject and ask a question?
Yeah.
Is it set in modern day New Year's? Or
No.
Talking in like?
We're talking historical King Arthurian New Year's.
I was thinking of the knights at a 2019 New Year's party.
It takes place in New York City. The ball is about to drop.
Yeah. We'll rewrite it. So you're saying the plot.
So it's this New Year's party in King Arthur's court, and he's gathered all of his friends, all of his people. You know, it's a big celebration and everything. And then this green giant. He's depicted as being larger, not like the green beans, big man. But this.
Thanks for that visual, Luke.
But this larger than average man strides in on a horse that is also green, and he is green, and he comes in and he says, pretty much He's like, I have a game. Who wants to play? Yeah. And the game is chop my head off. He says, whoever strikes at me, I will strike the same at them in 1 year's time. And King Arthur is kind of freaking out. He's like, oh gosh, this is my cool party. What the heck? And King Arthur's like, I will do it. And then Gawain steps in and he's like, I got this. And he says, I'll do the thing. And so he gets up there and he takes the Green Knight's axe and he chops the Green Knight's head off. Right. And then the Green Knight does the coolest, spookiest thing that you can do and picks up his head, puts it back on, and says, see you in 1 year's time.
I would start crying.
Yeah. And then he rides away into the night. Yeah. And so everybody's like, all right, I guess we should go party now. But there's this undertone because everybody knows that they have a year and then Gawain's going to have to go get his head chopped off. And so a year passes, it's autumn, and Gawain's like, okay, time to head out into the countryside to find the Green Knight so I can complete my side of the thing, because there's the whole chivalric code of honor, so he's not going to break his vow. And he's going through the wilderness, he's doing okay, he's getting the shit kicked out of him.
Yeah.
He finds a castle. He goes inside the castle, and they're like, oh, hey, you're a cool knight. We'll give you all the food and stuff. And there's a lord and a lady of the castle, and their name is Birkelin, I believe. And the lord says, well, I'm going hunting every day. Gawain, you stay inside, and everything, I'll trade you whatever I get hunting for whatever you earn by staying inside. So on the first day, the guy goes hunting, he kills a deer, and Gawain stays inside, and the lady of the castle comes into Gawain's bedroom, essentially to seduce him.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Wow.
It's really interesting because it really plays into those old misogynistic tropes of like the seductress woman and everything, who's there to jeopardize the hero's morality. And Gawain's like, no. Like, you're hot, but no. Pretty much.
Right.
Yeah. And she gives him a kiss. So then when the Lord gets back, he's like, hey, I killed a deer. And Gawain's like, hey, I got a kiss. And the Lord doesn't question this at all.
The Lord's like,
all right, cool.
You're a good looking guy. You deserve a kiss, I guess. Sure.
Yeah. And so Gawain gives the Lord like a lovely kiss. I think it's like, it's not like, usually it's like on the hand, and it's like through this chivalric thing. If that sounded weird to anyone, because of the time period.
Yeah.
So then the Lord goes hunting. The next day, Gawain gets 2 kisses. He trades those for the thing. And then on the third day, the lady comes in, and she tries to seduce him again. And Gawain's like super close to giving in. He's so close. And she's like, I'll give you my sash, this girdle.
Right.
I read it more like, like a belt, a sash is how I pretty much read it. And it's green, which is important because of the color archetyping happening there. And she says, it will protect you from harm. And Gawain says, fucking cool. I'm about to go get my head chopped off.
I really need
I
this.
need that thing.
He's like, I need everything I can.
Yeah. But the thing is, so he gets it, and he gets 3 kisses, and then the Lord comes back from his hunt with a fox hide, and Gawain gives him 3 kisses, but does not give him the sash. And so he kind of, it's that moment of weakness where he betrays his chivalric code of honor and his personal set of morals. And then he goes and finds the Green Knight, and the Green Knight takes 3 swings at him. He does 2 fakes. He's like, I'm gonna get ya. And then he goes for the cut, and he nicks Sir Gawain's neck.
Yeah.
And Sir Gawain gets really pissed off, saying that like the knight broke the rules. And the Green Knight says, hey, you remember that lord you were just hanging out with? That was me. Magic. And I think it was done by Guinevere, who was the lady and everything. And then basically Sir Gawain learns this lesson of just like to be completely honest and to not betray those things, and also to probably not seduce someone's wife.
That's not.
Yeah, not the chillest. But then he wears the sash as like a reminder of like this is the code I follow. And then he goes back to the court and tells the story, and then all of the other knights start wearing. I totally forgot about this part, and I looked up a plot summary. And all the other knights start wearing sashes as kind of like this like camaraderie thing of like, we stand with Gawain and his journey. And so that's...
We stand with Gawain for kind of being a fuckboy.
For kind of being a fuckboy. And so that's like, I think that's most people's primary exposure to Arthurian legend, which is interesting because it does capture like that, the time period and the code that these people were following and the code and also the ideals that were projected onto it. Because in all honesty, like a Christian set of ideals was probably not super closely followed by the historical people. But, and the same goes for like Old English stuff like Beowulf and things like that. But because of the people who then later translated and wrote these things, it gets projected onto it and fit in where it can be. So you have this weird conflict of like these like super Christian morals and ideals, and then wizards.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's like weird Christian ideals and then paganism.
Yeah.
Just like comes in there. So that's really interesting. One of the big ones that I think when I was going through, and I'm still going through my obsession with King Arthur, because it started when I was about 8 years old, and then it's just snowballed. I'm now 21, and it's all consuming. I own a replica of Excalibur. Cut from epicarmory.com.
No promos. This is a promo-less podcast. I'm cutting that.
You can, I'm sorry. But no, some of the fun stuff about like King Arthur is, good old Alfred Tennyson, who did Ulysses, did a lot of King Arthur stuff.
Oh, okay.
He did the poem, which is a very famous one, which is The Lady of Shalott, which is a poem based on it's based on Elaine of Shalott, who was kind of, I think she was in the earlier stuff, but the reason why I'm mentioning that is because there's an iteration of it that's really cool. But the Lady of Shalott thing, it kind of follows the idea that there's this maiden in a tower in Camelot, and she falls hopelessly in love with Lancelot from afar. But of course, he can never give her his, his love, because he's in love with Guinevere. So things happen, and she's so sad that at some point she I think runs into a battle or something like that, and she is pierced by an arrow, and she falls into a boat and floats down the river of Shalott, where Lancelot and all the knights see her, and he realizes he was an asshole.
Whoa.
Because he led her along, kind of thing. So that's one of the big ones. You should look it up. It's really cool. It's a poem. It's really cool.
Okay.
So that one, but the iteration that's based off of that is called Song of the Sparrow by, I think, like Lisa Sandell, I think. And what that is it's a YA adaptation of it, where it makes that character, because that character is so, of the Lady of Shalott, Elaine, it makes that character more of a feminist character and gives that character agency. Because as we talked about earlier, it's reflecting more modern literature, where like women are given more agency, and it's not as misogynistic, hopefully, and stuff like that. Woohoo! Progression. Yeah. And in that one, she's actually one of the like seamstresses / like medics for the war band that King Arthur's like troops are in. And through that, she's friends with the Knights of the Round Table. She still loves Lancelot. They can't be together. In that one, she's actually the sister of Galahad and Gawain or Gawain or whatever. And that one kind of follows her falling in love with Lancelot. Guinevere comes in because Arthur's like, look at the woman I'm going to marry. And everyone's like, we're not so sure about her. And then she just wants to fit in. And like, so it follows them. And that one ends with Guinevere and Elaine getting kidnapped and stolen away by the Saxons in their war camp. And then Elaine is all like, just kidding, I'm gonna get you out of here. Let me steal a sword from our sleeping guard, break us out of jail.
Oh shit.
Break us out of the camp.
Oh shit.
I know. And like they ride off out of there. She gets impaled by an arrow through that. Still, because what it is she stumbles upon the realization that the Saxons are gonna ambush the party and they don't know.
Oh.
And that's how they got captured, as they were just getting herbs or whatever. Remembering this as I tell it. And so then she, going down the boat, is so desperately trying to get back to them to be like, hey, the Saxons are about to ambush and kill all of us. And then she like almost dies in the boat, and then they're like, wow, she's a hero, and she lives in the end. And then her and the knight Tristan gets to be a thing at the end.
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah. I was hoping for Guinevere.
That'd be great. Yeah. That'd be so good. You know what? There are definitely iterations
of
I'm
lesbian
and gay. It's called fanfiction.com. Look it up.
Archive of our own.
Exactly. Which just
cutting that promo too.
But no, and it was really cool because like the final scene of the book is Arthur being like, okay, we are gonna go make Camelot, like because this is all before Camelot's even been created, so we're in the very early part of their service, and he's like, we're gonna go create Camelot. Who will stand with me? And they don't have any of the characters stand except Elaine stands first.
Nice.
And it gets to have like this fun connotation at the end. They have this female character being like, I'm braver than all of you. I will follow my king to go start Camelot.
Hell
and
yeah.
And then everyone else stands up.
Yes.
So, highly
What's
recommend.
that called again?
It is called Song of the Sparrow.
Song of the Sparrow.
And if you look it up, it'll pull that up. It's like one of the only books that author ever wrote.
Okay.
And it is a gem.
I might actually have to look that
Yeah,
up.
I have a copy if you'd like to borrow.
Sure.
So, going from there, I guess some other iterations.
Yeah.
Did you watch Sword in the Stone?
I didn't watch Sword in the Stone. I had the opportunity, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I'm not like so there have been a lot of King Arthur movies in the last 2 decades.
Many.
And there's also been interesting, one of the characters that I find the most, I just want to talk about this for 10 seconds.
Oh, please do.
Just because I heard about this version of Merlin, and it's the version by T.H. White, who was like the author who wrote like The Once and Future King, The Sword in the Stone, like those novels at the start of the 20th century.
I have those novels too.
That checks out completely.
Yep.
But this idea of a Merlin who ages backwards, so his consciousness starts at his death, and then he ages backwards, so he's like, that's how he's prophetic, but it also makes it hard to connect with people. And there was like some beautiful quote I read from it that was like every departure was a celebration because he knew that he got to spend like so much time with them and do all of these things to make that departure so meaningful. And every hello was like a terrible, terrible sorrow because it was his last time that he would see someone. And he would not be around them anymore in his life. And that is just beautiful and tragic
it's
to
so
me.
Powerful.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, me being me, a hermit, I love the idea of a weird old man wizard who's like, I know all the things, but parting is such sweet sorrow. Yeah. Like, it's so strange and beautiful. And Merlin has been in a lot of the recent adaptations. A lot,
yeah.
You mentioned briefly the TV show, which I have not watched.
Really?
Yeah.
You should. You'll sob. It's very sad.
Does Merlin do Benjamin Button in that one too? Or wait, no. How does Benjamin Button work? I forget. Anyway.
Not really. It's a very emotional TV show.
Okay.
So the TV show, I watched all of it in high school. I like marathoned it because it was on a streaming platform for a while. And it's still on there, but we won't promo. Is I watched it on there, and in that one, Merlin is like 16 years old.
Oh.
He is a young kid.
A lad.
A lad, if you will. A wee whippersnapper. And he has this great power. And his like uncle or grandfather, whatever, Gaius, who's another like kind of like wizard. Now in this one, Arthur is also like 16. Like they're all aged down, and it's before he's become king, and Uther Pendragon, his father, is on the throne, which is an extremely like oppressive regime. Like that's when where magic is outlawed. He has mage hunters where they go and they pretty much find any druids and people who practice magic and burn them in Camelot. Whoa. And it's like a really big thing. So then Merlin goes to Camelot. I can't remember why he goes, but I think he's just going to visit Gaius. And then when he's there, he accidentally gets tangled up with Arthur like immediately. And then he ends up becoming Arthur's like manservant, which is really funny because, not like in a slavery instance, but like in an instance where he's like, you know, it's like in jousting, you know, they have like the people who are like, oh, here, let me hand you your like, your sword and stuff.
Yeah, like a squire.
It's his squire, but
okay.
It's his squire. They interchange manservant with squire, but he's his squire, which ends up being really funny because the whole time Gaius, who's kind of prophetic, knows something bad's going to happen. They have to prepare for it and knows that Merlin is going to be destined to be this great wizard. So the whole time he's in Camelot, he's trying to train to be a good wizard, but like he has to hide because he's legit working in the palace.
Oh, shit.
And the cool part about this is actually, it's the cast for it and like the characters. They not everyone's white, which is great. So in this, like, Guinevere is played by like an African American actress, and she, I think she's like, she's not a noblewoman in this actually. I think she's just, I think she's a peasant in it, and she like rises to being queen at the end.
Oh wow!
And it's like a really cool thing. And the show follows Arthur becoming who he is and actually forming the Round Table because it's not formed yet, and the knights aren't even recruited yet. So you kind of have like the found family aspect. You have Merlin training to be Merlin, as well as there's a dragon locked in the castle that he goes to visit to get training from. And the whole time Arthur is just like a really spoiled rich kid who's just trying his best.
Valid interpretation.
Right. And that is the Merlin TV show. And there's something so kitschy about it and something so weird about it that makes you fall in love with it. And then when like the final episodes happen, you're sobbing for like 3 hours.
Wow.
And you're like, that was an emotional roller coaster.
Okay, I'll give it a look.
I would give it a look. Remember, it it's older, so
yeah,
the CGI is not amazing.
Fair.
Namely, the CGI dragon looks like a puppet. I'll go ahead and say that. I'll show it to you in a minute after this. But no, I think that for a lot of people now is their big intro, just because it was such a big BBC show.
I mean, there's also like, it's interesting because you mentioned that idea of like found family, but and you mentioned this beforehand that like, and it was mentioned also in that video I watched where it's like King Arthur is the people's king. And he's like, he fits that folk hero archetype so well that like the story is so kind of like, I don't want to say universal, but there are universal aspects to it. Like the idea of the Round Table as like this symbol of equality between people, and the aspects of chivalry where there's honor and duty, and this idea of trying to be the best person possible and be a good leader and be a good representative and be a good friend. And we had a King Arthur movie in, what, like 2016?
It was 2017.
2017.
I watched it. It was...
Oh.
Ooh.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And last year we had The Boy Who Would Be King.
Yes. Which is also very cute.
Which I also did not see.
That's fair. I'm staying very on brand right now that I watched all of those.
That is fair.
There's a new one coming out, too.
Oh, really?
They're making a live action of The Sword and the Stone.
Ah, okay. That could be cool.
I think it will be okay.
Yeah.
Though if anything needs a live action adaptation, it would be Road to Camelot.
Okay.
Which is another Disney film.
Ah,
and
gotcha.
it's actually about, I believe it's Sir Galahad's daughter named Kaylee, and she wants to be a knight, and her father dies when she's young, and she pretty much trains to be a knight, but there's this whole thing where they're like, no, women can't be knights, and she's like, well, I'll show you, I'll go get the Holy Grail. And in this one, Merlin's a villain, but it doesn't matter. And then she actually goes with another boy who wants to be a knight named Tristan, who as we know, becomes a knight later. And that character is actually blind, and they have an entire song talking about how people who are blind can still be knights.
Whoa.
And it's actually very progressive for like 2004.
Pretty cool.
And it was very cool. And he has a whole thing where and like it follows their journey as they pretty much rescue Camelot, and at the end they both get knighted, and they're like, you are the ones we needed to save the day.
Nice.
So what were you going to finish saying?
Just that it's universal. And so that idea, I don't know, it's a bit of a tangent, but
Please go on it.
we have this conception of like all of these medieval warriors and stuff being exclusively men and everything, and that might be true in England, but there's a lot of historical discrepancy because of how things were recorded and stuff. And there was like a recent study that proved like definitively, and it's been going on for a little while, and it was kind of a big deal. But this like famous Viking tomb of like this very important, like the gold standard of what a Viking warrior should look like was a woman.
Yeah.
And like the historical interpretation of that tomb for years, gold standard Viking warrior is actually a woman.
Yeah.
So it's very
cool.
Yeah,
when you
it's
think about
very cool. And also, I mean, it shows like, and then, a bunch of people want to say like, well, you're just putting a modern twist on it. And then people are saying like, well, since she's a woman, she couldn't actually have been the gold standard for a Viking. But like with all the evidence that was there, that was the conclusion they first came to.
Exactly.
And then they proved she was a woman. So like, why not? And I mean, the answer to why not is like a big answer. And a lot of it's I shouldn't say that.
Tune in next week for that answer.
Tune in next week for that answer. You already, you know what? If you know, you know.
Exactly.
So that's really cool, and it's cool that there are those more like progressive versions of these stories, because personally, I think that a less progressive version of the story, the Monty Python and the Holy Grail, is not great.
No.
It's funny sometimes. But
it didn't age well.
No.
I remember watching it when I was younger, and I was like, oh, that's really funny. And I watch it now, and I'm like, oh, that's borderline.
Yeah.
But kind of going off of the progressive thing with like King Arthur's stories, is as you were talking, I just remembered Disney Channel actually had a movie called Avalon High, which was, if you remember.
Yes, I remember that existing. I think that was in the era, was that around like The Descendants, or was that like...
It was actually earlier, because
we
would have probably been about 14, 15 when it came out.
Oh, okay.
It was a little bit ago.
Totally missed that one.
It was really cool though, because that one was, you had this girl who... just because they couldn't be like more obvious, last name was Pendragon, and at least I think it was, if I remember correctly. And what happened is she's going to high school, she's like, everything's normal, just moved here, her parents are historians, which is like cool.
Nice.
And they start to realize that events of King Arthur's day start to happen again, and all of King Arthur's knights and King Arthur have been reincarnated, so to speak, in these like teenagers.
I remember that.
And it's really funny because I think they're having like a school production of like a King Arthur thing.
I remember there being like some musical element to it.
Musical thing. They do fights at the end, and like one of their friends, like Merlin, they're like, "No, you just misunderstood. Please don't kill us." But that one has more of the idea, kind of, I think, in the same vein of the idea of, like, Windy, like, Wu Homecoming Warrior had, which is, like, that power is always there, and then if something goes wrong, then it'll take on the form of somebody else.
Gotcha.
Use them as a vehicle to fix something in an instance, or at least give them the power, and they're like, here is your prophecy.
Man, those powers, invasive.
Yeah, gotta ask first.
Consent, very important.
Yeah, listen, I do not want to be Arthur Pendragon. Ask me first.
Wait, let me be Merlin, please.
Yeah, wait on. I changed my mind.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, those are some of like the most recent ones. I remember the most recent one,
The Boy Who Would Be King?
Not The Boy Who Would Be King, but the one prior. That, I think it was just called King Arthur. Yeah. That was the weirdest film I've ever seen in my life. Because it was shot like a music video.
Oh, what?
I know. I know. It had really weird jump cuts.
Okay.
And that one was interesting because it made King Arthur a jerk. And that was like the entire film. Jerk, and then at the end getting to be king, and like that was the film.
Okay, awesome.
So
I think that's a pretty good closing note.
Yeah.
King Arthur is actually a jerk. Thanks.
He is. He's actually a jerk.
Cate, did you prepare any puns to take us home real quickly?
I did.
By the way, I just brief tangent. To get back onto my favorite thing, which is the idea of Merlin aging backwards.
It's so cool.
Yeah, that was there's like a whole TV Tropes article about it. Not that TV Tropes is a flawless source, but like it's cool. And then that led me on to this idea called like the Mohs scale of sci-fi hardness, which is a conception of like how time travel is realized in fiction.
Okay.
With like the soft end of the scale being how does time travel work? You pull this lever and it works. The middle section being how does time travel work? Well, quantum mechanics, Einstein, Hawking, and getting into like pseudo scientific like theoretical breakdown of it. And then hard sci-fi being it's impossible to travel back in time.
That is really cool.
Really cool.
I had one last tangent.
Yeah.
And it was about Tennyson's King Arthur. And it was like just one sentence about it. But the cool part about his was he more focused on Arthur as a person and how he was destined to be a great king and a great ruler, but it was the folly of man, the folly of being a human and having human ambition is what killed him ultimately.
Hubris.
His hubris.
Hubris.
His hubris. All right, so here's our pun. Drumroll, please. Thank you. Other than King Arthur, nobody was able to pull the sword out of the stone. You could say they didn't have Arthurization.
Jesus.
Isn't that bad?
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that like really bad?
That's really, really bad. You know, I heard that Arthur was actually historically a very prolific writer.
Really?
Yeah. Because he believed that the Pendragon was mightier than the sword.
No! Ew! Stop! That's a good one. Alright. With that as our closing note, thank you for tuning into Lit Chat.
This has been Luke Barrett.
And Kate Kurtz.
Have a wonderful day. Huzzah!